We have responsibility, Terry. We did not have any accountability for what was going on there, and we should have. This is ridiculous. You're going to ask me in the middle of the thing when they've already breached the inaugural stuff that should we call the Capitol Police? I mean the National Guard? Why weren't the National Guard there to begin with?
They thought that they had sufficient resources.
That is not a question of how they had been. They don't know. They clearly didn't know, and I take responsibility for not having them just prepare for more.
As for what actually happened on January 6th, unaired footage we just obtained from congressional sources shows top Democratic lawmakers questioning the whereabouts of the National Guard during the January 6th Capitol attack. As the Capitol was being overrun, then House Speaker Nancy Pelosi grilled her chief of staff about the situation as they were evacuated for their safety. Take a look.
You're going to ask me in the middle of the thing when they've already breached the inaugural stuff that should we call the Capitol Police? I mean the National Guard? Why weren't the National Guard there to begin with?
They thought that they had sufficient resources.
That is not a question of how they had been. They don't know. They clearly didn't know, and I take responsibility for not having them just prepare for more.
The footage also shows Pelosi and Senate Democratic leader Chuck Schumer at Fort McNair speaking on the phone with then Army Secretary Ryan McCarthy and later Washington Mayor Muriel Bowser about the status of their request for help from the National Guard.
Secretary McCarthy and Senator Schumer, we're at Fort McNair. Do you know what's going on? Okay, well, D.C. has requested the National Guard, and it's been denied by DOD. I'd like to know a good goddamn reason why it's been denied. We need them fast. We've all had to, I've never seen anything like this. We're like a third world country here. We had to run and evacuate the Capitol. They have not denied it. I spoke to the Secretary of the Army. He's given a full okay to give the National Guard. He said it was not denied. I'm going to call up the effing Secretary of DOD.
Why weren't the National Guard there to begin with?
They thought that they had sufficient resources.
That is not a question of how they had been. They don't know. They clearly didn't know, and I take responsibility for not having them just prepare for more. We have had some mixed messages about national response of your request or our request as well for the National Guard to move in.
Okay, if I could, Madam Speaker, let me just give you a rundown. Your chief, the United States Capitol Police, sent a request for National Guard support probably more than an hour ago. I thought there was some resistance from the Secretary of the Army folks to deploy uniformed guard personnel on the ground of the Capitol.
It took more than 3 hours, 3 hours for the National Guard to arrive to that chaotic scene, to that riot, to the attack on the Capitol. According to Politico, 4 former members of the Guard described a frustrating experience of being prevented for hours from being able to respond, and recounted senior Army officials expressing concern about the optics of deploying the Guard. But they saved their fiercest criticism for McCarthy, Kevin McCarthy, who they described as, for the Army, a totally different McCarthy, I apologize, the person that they were trying to reach there on the phone, who they described as unresponsive to their outreach in the midst of the chaos. Republicans have spent years accusing Pelosi of neglecting her duty to defend the Capitol, despite evidence that it was a shared responsibility among congressional leaders who in turn relied on the assessments of police and security officials. But as Politico reports, the new footage does not bolster GOP claims of Pelosi being at fault. Instead, it largely aligns with and adds depth to previous snippets of Alexandra Pelosi's footage released by the January 6th Select Committee and in an HBO documentary that was released in 2022.
Why weren't the National Guard there to begin with?
They thought that they had sufficient
That
resources.
is not a question of how they had been. They don't know. They clearly didn't know, and I take responsibility for not having them just prepare for more.
Congress passed a law. It's 2 U.S. Code 1970. Look it up. Just make sure you look it up before December 22 when they changed it. So what was in effect on the 6th? That requires me to go and get approval for bringing in National Guard or federal assistance in advance. I have to go to the Capitol Police Board and get approval from congressional leadership in advance, like I did on January 3rd. I'm denied twice because of optics and because the intelligence didn't support it. So think about that.
Let me ask you the question, who made that decision? Who denied you?
I was denied by Paul Irving, House Sergeant Arms, and also Mike Stenger, Senate Sergeant Arms.
And who do they
on
work,
January 3rd.
Who do they work for?
It would have been working for Pelosi on the House side. That Pelosi was the #1 boss, and then McConnell on the Senate side.
Ah.
So
effectively, Mitch McConnell and Nancy Pelosi shut down your request.
My request was shut down, one, because of optics, which is interesting. You're going to hear that term come up a couple more times. Optics, or the look of the National Guard on the Hill.
Why weren't the National Guard there to begin with?
They thought that they had sufficient resources.
That is not a question of how they had been. They don't know. They clearly didn't know, and I take responsibility for not having them just prepare for more.